Welcome to London Lights. I'm your host, Dan Mailer, and tonight we're going to be talking about something a little bit different. We won't be talking about a person, but rather a special time and place in the city of London. In the 1960s and 1970s, Christmas at Simpsons, downtown London. So today we're going to have two special guests. The first is going to be Ryan Craven, and then later in the show, we'll have Joe O'Neill join us. But Ryan, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
It's good to have you. Why don't we start by talking about your book? So you do have a book here. I'll just bring it up to the camera. And it is titled A Downtown London Tradition, Simpsons at Christmas. Now, my copy is extremely valuable because you did autograph it for my two boys. Thank you for that. Tell me about the book. What motivated you to write it? And what do you hope to accomplish with it?
So the project started as a public display, kind of like an art show that I did in partnership with Museum London and another organization called London Fuse. And I actually had an office kind of overlooking the Simpsons, the old Simpsons department store, which is now called Market Tower. And I was sort of involved in kind of trying to animate and activate downtown London, and especially Dundas Street. So I sort of gradually, I would regularly hear from kind of older folks about the Simpsons windows at Christmas and how that was sort of this, it seemed like it really had a big place in our city's history and the history of downtown. So I had the idea, hey, there's a bunch of empty windows there. Why don't we try to print some big photos from that time of those windows and put them up for Christmas time as a little bit of a Christmas animation. And this was actually my first time ever doing anything like this, and I found it extremely surprisingly easier than I thought it would be. The Central Library had all the history very accessibly. The Western Archives had all the photos very accessible. They came together really quickly and I mean, I had to put a lot of work into it, but yeah, so the idea of the show was really just to give people a draw, to create a draw for the downtown and kind of lift people's spirits and kind of show what the downtown used to look like at Christmas time.
Yeah,
and
well, I think that's great. I think it's great, Ryan. Now, I certainly remember that as a boy myself in the 1960s, 1970s. Going downtown, it became a kind of an annual family tradition. You'd go downtown to see the windows. The Santa Claus parade would often be going on as well. You check out the windows. For me, a guy that was basically grew up in London, was never far outside of London, never been to Disneyland or anything, to see these displays and the moving animated scenes and the moving little characters. It was mesmerizing. It was magic. And for me, it captures a great memory to look at your book. Now, I'm not sure how old you are, but did you ever have a chance to experience that yourself?
I don't have any memory. No, I'm 37, and so I technically would have been alive when the Simpsons department store was still there, but it's not a part of my memory. No, it was really just sort of a, I think often historians look really far back, and I like the idea of looking kind of a little bit more closer to now and trying to remember that time.
Right. So when I met you, you had the book signing at the Museum London, I think it was. And there was a very healthy crowd there to come out. They had interest in this subject. They had interest in you and what you were doing. So what has the response been to the book?
I mean, I was pretty surprised by how well received the book was. So we did the photo display one Christmas year, and then the next Christmas we got our act together and finally got the book out. And it was kind of nice because it spread the joy out in a sense. And so yeah, so the next year, 2015 or 2014, 2015 it was, and it was amazing. We were pretty sheepish. We only printed 500 copies at first because we didn't really know what it would be. And I think before Christmas that year we reprinted 4 times. So I mean, some of the bookstores describe it as the best-selling book of a certain year, and which is there's no like official measure for that, but I think it perhaps was. And it was amazing. It was really fun. There was one radio show host, I don't remember his name right now, but he really picked it up. He loved it. his parents owned real estate in like a store downtown, the Fanny Goose store,
Oh,
and
really?
yeah.
Steve Garrison.
Yeah. So he was actually played a pretty key role in promoting the book for me. He had me on a few times on his morning show,
Great.
and that really pushed it. Yeah, so it was amazing. And I, as I think I might have mentioned earlier, the book is still selling 5 years later. Attic Books put it on their website and sold 50 copies or something like this really quickly. So yeah, so it's I mean it is small and it's $10, so it's not a huge investment. And for Christmas time, it's an easy win.
Yeah. Well, I've noticed just in doing this show that I'll post the odd thing on Facebook or social media, and there's a tremendous amount of interest for Londoners in nostalgic features. So if we talk about, for instance, we did the Bill Brady show, and I mentioned Bunny Bundle, and like the likes were coming in. There's like 400 likes in 2 days. So these kinds of nostalgic memories, I think there's a special place in the hearts of many Londoners who experienced these things over the years. So I think you're really onto something there. And what I like too is you talk about don't just have pictures in the book, but you talk about some of the history about Simpsons and the Bay and the initial store that was there, Smallman and Ingram, and how business kind of developed in downtown London. And these windows were part of the attraction of shopping down there. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, I that's the part that I like to see, the evolution, that it started out as two young men who were entrepreneurs in 1877, and they grew their store from like one small tiny footprint to almost taking up the whole corner of Dundas and Richmond, and became the biggest department store in the city. And then when Simpsons from Toronto was looking for an expansion, a way to expand in London, they just decided to buy the biggest department store in London and turned it into theirs. And yeah, no, nostalgia, especially at Christmas time. I mean, like people are looking for nostalgia, and so it definitely it's an easy win there. And yeah, I think the thing is with the memory of downtown London being what it was, um, everyone I think really wants Dundas or downtown and Dundas to succeed, and so seeing these examples of what it used to be, I think people are really into it. And the other thing with that I wanted to mention is that the Christmas parade, like there was, I was amazed by the integration of all these different things. So the Simpsons Christmas windows would always be launched at the same time as the Santa Claus parade. So
Right.
the Santa Claus parade would happen. That would be kind of like kickoff of the Christmas shopping season, and that's when the windows would be like revealed.
Very cool. Very cool. Now, I understand that when the book came out, or when you were at least planning it, you were contacted by one of the sons of one of the carpenters that would actually work on the displays in London. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was from the show, the display I did the year before.
Okay.
That's when he got in touch, which is why I was able to include his note in the book. Yeah, he wrote me this beautiful email. I got a lot of emails from people. A lot of people worked at the store, and I think that's one of the keys to why it was so exciting. People whose aunt worked there or whatever, they would buy it for her. But yeah, so this is again amazing how things have changed in terms of the way we do retail now. There was in-house carpentry team of 4 full-time people.
Wow.
who did everything in the store, but one of their main projects was the windows. And what he told me, this was nowhere in the literature that I had looked into. He told me that the windows would start in Toronto, and then they would dismantle them and move them to London for the next Christmas year.
Right.
And then the year after that, they would go to Manitoba, to Winnipeg. And I just love that type of little tidbit. And he shared a really cool picture of his dad and the other crew members on the roof of the building. It's just amazing. 4 full-time. Imagine a store right now downtown having a team of 4 full-time carpenters who construct these amazing structures and windows. It's just completely otherworldly to me.
Oh, absolutely. It's really cool. The picture that is behind me on the screen is actually the Toronto store, and it shows some of the uh, animated features that would be eventually transferred to London for the following season. And you can capture a little bit of the magic in that photo. Ryan, it's been great to have you. Where can people get a copy of your book? I think there'll be some more interest once this program airs, even though it might be in the heat of May or June, who knows. Where can they get a copy, and can they get them online, or should they go down to a store downtown?
I think you could buy them perhaps online, but maybe it has to be picked up. So there's two retailers. Attic Bookshop on Dundas is one, and then the other is the gift shop at Museum London, which is called Muse. Those are the two locations that for sure will have them.
Here's the book again: Simpsons at Christmas, a downtown London tradition. Thank you for doing that book, Ryan. People are going to get a lot of enjoyment out of that, and it's going to rekindle a lot of great memories. Folks, viewers, stay with us. We'll be right back in a moment with Joe O'Neill. But first, we have to take this commercial break. Thanks again, Ryan. Take care. Hi, welcome back to London Lights. We're here talking about a special time in London's history, Christmas in downtown London in the 1960s and 70s. And I'm joined now by a special guest, local London historian, Joe O'Neill. Good to have you here, Joe. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Hey, London has its share of history buffs, but you're one that stands out in the crowd, and you're a colorful character, and you seem to know everything about London's history that we want to talk about. So why do you think history is so important? Why should we talk about it? Why should we care about history? And why should Londoners care about history?
Well, because so much of what takes place in the city, why it happens, how the city is even laid out, even the way the streets are named and laid out, all relates to something in history. And for example, when you go out York Street and you hit the fairgrounds, you know that weird curve you go around, you know how York Street doesn't go straight, you got to go around the fairgrounds. Well, that's because there was two old cemeteries there, and the road we were following was the road that went between the two original cemeteries.
Oh, wow.
So there all sorts of little trivia things like this all over the city.
Well, and that's why we have you here today. We want to talk about the excitement that would fill downtown London at December every year, maybe late November, 1960s, 1970s. You were all part and parcel of that because your funeral home was right there in the midst of the action, right?
I grew up as a child, right? In fact, I'm only half a block away from where I grew up as a child. I grew up in the 60s and 70s, right in the core area. So a lot of this is personal memories. And then later on, I became an auxiliary police constable, and I used to work the parade with the London police. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Well,
But
let's give Londoners a sense of what it was like in the 1960s. I expect there were no suburban malls at that point in time. I expect there was no Amazon. They wouldn't be shopping online. So where do you go to shop if you're in London in 1960s?
well, there was the Eatons and the Sears catalog, but you only used them if you lived up north, you know, like Lucan or Exeter, somewhere really far away. But no, the only shopping in London was downtown, and the only exception was London East. And London East had the edge on shopping because they would stay open late, sometimes to 5 or 7 o'clock, when downtown was shut down around 4 or 5.
Mm.
So all your Christmas shopping, but the Santa Claus parade was used by all the businesses to start the mark of the Christmas shopping season. And they had all sorts of little secrets and tricks. Like a lot of the prizes and toys given out in the floats would have little coupons, come to Kresge's or come to Eaton's or something. Or
Right.
they would do things like one thing I remember as a kid, standing there freezing to death. Everybody would just freeze to death. So every store downtown had a sandwich and a coffee bar, and they would have specials on, like, let's say, hot chocolate. So, Mom, can I go get a hot chocolate? Sounds like a good idea. And as you go in to get a hot chocolate when the parade's over, of course, you had to walk by all the toys. So,
Oh, I remember that.
yes.
Hey, Mom and Dad, can we stop here?
Yeah.
I think I want that walkie-talkie for Christmas.
And all the kids wanted to see the Simpsons windows, and all the parents dreaded it because Simpsons would put all the really, really expensive toys in the windows, right? You know, they put in the latest train set, and Mom and Dad would go in to look at the price of the train set and see it was like 3 weeks' pay and have a heart attack. And then, oh God, what else can I buy? You know?
Right. So tell us about your memories. Why don't we start with the parade, and
Yeah.
we'll move to the Simpsons windows, and then the the lights of Victoria Park.
Well, the main thing about the parade is that downtown London, we just shut down for the whole morning when the parade happened. People would come from out of town, and everybody in town would come, and there was just no parking, and the parking would start filling up 3 4 hours ahead of time. I mean, if the parade was at 10 in the morning, you know, the sun would be rising, and people are driving around looking to get parking. So, and then, yeah, as you said, we had a funeral home downtown. All the funeral homes in London at that time were downtown on Dundas and King Street. I think they, with the exception one on Hamilton Road. So we would all have to cancel and postpone funerals on that Saturday morning because there was physically no way you could get in. I remember we had one family that absolutely insisted, and we said, fine, no problem. And the funeral was delayed an hour because they couldn't get in. They said, oh, we didn't believe you. So word of mouth would get out. And the other thing too is all the churches downtown that had the funerals. And the other thing, not many people would realize this. A lot of people would get married in December because there was a tax break back then you could get. So a lot of people would even get married on December 31st because you get a tax break for the whole year, even if you were only married for one day in the year. Okay. So Saturdays were busy days for weddings and all the churches downtown. But again, when it came to the Santa Claus parade, it was like, well, maybe we got to push it off a bit.
So what was it about the Santa Claus parade that made it so special? I mean, I've seen old pictures and photos, and it looked like a lot of work went into those floats. There were horses, there were celebrities, there were the disc jockeys from CFPL and other shows, and TV shows as well. Some of the ones from CFPL TV, even politicians. Well, maybe they weren't the favorite, but
no,
you know,
all the politicians were there somehow.
Yeah, and what made it the go-to thing to do?
Well, the internet's changed a lot. I mean, you would see things in the Santa Claus parade you would never see any other time of year because you got to remember, even cartoons. Saturday morning was the only time you could watch cartoons. There was no cartoons the rest, so you might see people dressed up as cartoon characters. Celebrities, you'd never see celebrities in person anywhere. Now, if you want to see a celebrity, you can get on the internet. You can find millions of them. So the internet has changed a lot of stuff. Back then, it was the only time you got to see things and hear things, the bands, the parades, the live music. A lot of live venues back then, too. It wasn't just the Santa Claus parade. Live venues, I remember my cousins taking me to a wrestling match on a Saturday night at the Gardens. You know, it was incredible to see this stuff for real in person because you got to see stuff you never got to see on TV or even hear on the radio.
Right. I know that it was sad for me is a few years ago to hear the Ringling Brothers Circus finally called it quits. And I think you're onto something there when you talk about this was the only game in town at one point in time.
Yeah.
There was no internet. You had to go to this circus-like atmosphere with the Santa Claus parade to get that thrilling excitement as a kid. And there really was nothing like it, was there?
No, nothing at all. Nothing at all. There was nothing to compare. And it was the other thing too is one of the things I remember working as an auxiliary constable was the attitude at the time. Everybody loved to work the Christmas parade, even though it was a traffic nightmare. It would drive you crazy. Everybody loved working it because everybody who came was in such a good mood. It's hard to describe, but everybody was pleasant. Everybody was happy. It didn't seem to matter how bad traffic was jammed up. It didn't seem to matter what was going on. Everybody was pleasant. It was just this wholesome feeling. It was almost like going back in the 1950s. You know how the old TV shows, everybody's happy and pleasant? Well, during the Santa Claus parade for that couple hours, it was like that in real life.
And that has to be good for the city to have that sense of community spirit all together as one for something positive and happy. I think we really miss that kind of thing these days.
Oh, yeah, very much. I mean, I think social media is making us all hate each other and making us all divisive. And back then, you didn't have that. The Santa Claus parade is something, too, where everybody, no matter what their beliefs or their systems were, everybody came together and had a good time. I mean, I had Jewish friends who would come down and enjoy the Santa Claus parade. They didn't care.
Well, now behind me is a picture of one of the Christmas windows, and
right.
Our previous guest on the show talked about that. So what are your memories of that? I think he mentioned that the Christmas windows at Simpsons were unveiled on the same day that the Santa Claus parade occurred.
Yeah.
So tell me about that.
Well, I would, since I live downtown, I would never try and see them on Christmas Day because there would actually be lineups. I remember as a kid, lineups outside the store, not to get in, but just to look at the windows. And
Wow.
it was the best way I could describe it is when I was a teenager, I actually lined up to go see the first Star Wars movie.
Okay.
So if any of you remember that, that's kind of what the Christmas windows were almost like. Everybody's lining up to see windows, for God's sakes. It was like, it's not even a movie. You're just looking at a window. So I would wait for a few days, afterwards and then go down. But even like the week after they were unveiled, people would be crowding around the windows and you'd have to push in to get in to see them.
Well, I remember as a kid in the
Yeah,
1960s being mesmerized watching Wonderful World of Disney or the Wide Wide World of Disney, whatever
exactly.
it was called on Saturday afternoons. And we didn't have the money to go to Disney World or Disneyland. So this was our own little slice of Disneyland in a way. And it really was a special event as a boy. And the girls that went, the kids just loved it. And we all loved it. And we were willing to line up in the freezing cold just to catch a glimpse of these moving windows, be fascinated by the characters and the scenery.
The scenery. And then, like I say, on your way walking downtown, all the stores, it wasn't just Simpsons, all the stores would have displays. That slowly disappeared over the years. But I remember even thinking that some, like downtown London, used to have some really fancy shoe stores. And even the shoe stores had interesting displays in the windows for kids. It was something, I don't know how to explain it without you being there at the time. I tried to explain this to my kids and they looked at me and go, "Oh God, Dad's at it again," like
Yeah, Tyrone the talking shoe was probably out there. Um,
exactly. Well,
so
ash plants used to have the famous, they only had for 2 years, you could put your feet in the x-ray machine and see your feet, the bones of your feet in the shoes. Then they found out radioactivity was bad. But that's the kind of thing you could get in downtown London.
I remember that, and I did it
Yeah.
numerous times. And eventually, my mom said, "You can't do that anymore." And I wasn't sure why. I never understood it, but I'm glad we only did it a few times. So it wasn't just the parade, it wasn't just the windows, there was Victoria Park as well. And that's
Exactly.
still a tradition that Londoners cherish. The lighting of the lights is always a big event, and it's exciting. What do you remember about that back then? Was that all part of the parade and the Simpsons windows?
Oh, I remember it being a big thing. Um, you know what? One of the big things was it's hard to describe. We have really good Christmas lights nowadays. The LED lights are amazing. Back then, Christmas lights were evil. They were dim. Most of them were is if you had a line of, let's say, 50 light bulbs and one light bulb went out, the whole line died. So if mom and dad actually did get up and put up Christmas lights, which my dad did, and the light went out, you had to get the ladder up into blowing snow and unscrew and screw in one light bulb each until you got it working. So not everybody put up Christmas lights, not like they do nowadays. So you might have some here and some there, and Christmas lights were really expensive back then. So this was seeing all these lights together was like, oh my God, like these people, city must be multimillionaires to be able to afford all these lights and put them. You couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
I mean, nowadays they're so cheap compared to what they were back then.
Well, Joe, these are all great memories and they're ones cherished by many Londoners. And things change, life changes. We know downtown London is really suffering right now. It's
Hmm.
a shadow of its former self. Are you hopeful about its future? Do you think it can come back? I know all the malls are very attractive for shopping and it's just not the same as it used to be. But are you hopeful for downtown London?
I'm hoping, I think the thing that was bringing downtown London back, like we didn't used to have the countdown at New Year's Day at night in downtown London. You never did that. I think that's really cool how they do that. And my favorite part of living downtown is all the festivals. Like I really miss Sunfest and Folk
Oh,
Festival this year. And I think that's where the future lies. So you start bringing more of these festivals back. That's what's going to make downtown something special again.
that's true. It's deceiving when we look downtown. You walk down Dundas Street, you
Yeah.
get an image of a very rough time down there. But the city is much more than that. It's got many other parts, bigger parts, and as you touched on it, things like the festivals. I mean,
Yep.
we did a show on Sunfest, and it really is something very unique in Canada. And it was started by a Londoner, So these are the types of things I think we can celebrate. We shouldn't get too distracted by the state of Dundas Street downtown. And I think as you've touched on it, the festivals, getting the lockdown over with, hopefully there are better days ahead for Dundas Street in downtown London. Thanks for being part of this show, Joe.
No problem.
It's a pleasure having you. I think I'm going to tap into you for something else
No
down
problem.
the road. And it's been a pleasure preparing for the show with you and chatting about it. Any parting words as we sign off?
No, I'm glad you had me. And like I said, this is kind of unique. Usually the history I talk about stuff is research. This is something I live firsthand. I got to talk about.
That's great. Okay, Joe, thanks for being here to talk about a special time, downtown London at Christmas in the 1960s and 70s. Remember to get this book by our first guest, Ryan Craven, and you can get that online and elsewhere. Thanks for being with London Lights. Thanks, Joe, and you take care of yourself.
You too. Take care.